So now we have Diane Roussin, who is the project director of the Winnipeg Boldness Project. And if anybody does not know who Diane is, again, I encourage you to read the little pamphlet that's on your table. So Diane is the reason why I joined the Boldness Project. I think, you know, if it weren't for Diane leading this project, it's really important work, but I think Diane being from the community and have worked in the community, it made me as a community leader feel already engaged in this process. So really excited to have Diane leading this. She is an amazing woman and an amazing leader. So here we have Diane.
Anyway, so welcome, and I'm really excited to have all you folks in the room, and I don't know everybody in the room, but most of the people I know in the room are like some of my favorite people. And so I think we were very purposeful and intentional in who we invited today. So I just want you to know that I think very highly of you, and I have faith in all you folks, because I know what you guys have been doing for probably your whole lives and the kind of change you guys have made in the work that you do. So we're hoping you can walk with us and help create more change for our families. Again, some of you may have heard about the Boldness Project, and some of you might only be hearing about it for the first time. So we're just going to do a little overview of what the Winnipeg Boldness Project is, and then locate it within how we're connecting to the Canada Learning Bond as an initiative. So overall, it's a new project that's looking to have some impact within the Point Douglas neighborhood. And so we're using the Point Douglas neighborhood characterization as defined by the City of Winnipeg. So it's basically Tracks, Whit River, sort of Carruthers-ish, and then McPhillips. And so it's about 35,000 people-ish that live in that neighborhood. So basically the North End is typically how people actually refer to it. And so we're also using an early childhood development lens. So we're looking, I mean, at the most proper, we say we're looking from 0 to 6. But again, for those of you who have been working with us, we know that we take a very holistic view of our families. And so the 0 to 6-year-olds do not live in isolation of their families, and they do not live in isolation of their neighborhoods and their communities. And so we know that we have to pay attention to the whole continuum of caregivers for our kids. And so earlier today, somebody made the analogy of a fish as the continuum. And so from the head of the fish to the tail of the fish, we recognize that. So, you know, while we might most directly focus on children, we know that there's this whole environment that's required if we're going to be successful. So very proud to say that where we started with the Winnipeg Boldness, because we're about a year old now, and where we started, and I was asked if I would participate as a staff person for the Winnipeg Boldness, and I had to really think long and hard about, was I ready to do that, and why would I do that? And by the time I made the decision to do it, I knew for a fact that this was going to be community driven. You know, I mean, if you want me, that's the way it's going to be, right? Because that's what I believe in. I think that that's how we need to move forward in all of our initiatives. And so, I feel very proud to say that I think we are very grounded in the community, and the community has, from the very outset, so there was a few of us sitting together, pointing over here, some of these ladies, were sitting in the room when we first heard about the word boldness. And we went away and had our little discussions about, are we going to let this into our neighborhood or not? Obviously, we made a good decision, and just decided that not only are we going to let it into our neighborhood, but we're going to get on board in a big, big way and really drive it. So, so I look at Dilly and Tanya, who are here, who were part of those early discussions and have been walking with us ever since. And I know lots of other people, or some other people in the room were involved in some very early discussions about boldness, and I've been walking with boldness for quite some time too. So thank you very much. So while I would say that the initial conversations were really located in community and the idea of what do we want to do for our kids in this neighborhood, we recognize that nobody can do it alone. So parents can't do it alone, community-based organizations can't do it alone, governments can't do it alone, nobody can do it alone. And so we do need to walk together and figure it out how it is like we're going to truly collaborate. And I know we like to throw partnerships and collaboration around quite a lot. And so it's good that we're talking about that, but to actually do it is really, really hard. It's a really tough work, so we just got to keep at it. And the idea that, and I just want to acknowledge some of our parents that are in the room too. So Shannon and Kevin, who have been walking with us from the very start too. And so, you know, being parents right from the neighborhood with kids right from the neighborhood, I mean, that's mostly who we go to and say, does this make sense? Are we on track? You know, are we getting way out in left field? Like, put us back, you know, and just making sure that it's making sense, that we're not getting too far off into la la land in some of what we're doing. So thank you very much for continuing to come to all these crazy meetings that we ask you to come to, and spend so much time really putting your thoughts into what it is we need to do for our kids. So you know, the long and short of it is, the bold goal we talk about is creating a 6-year strategy. And I know this sounds really simple, but again, for those of you who probably wordsmith and things like that, to get down to a concise statement took like, you know, 10,000 meetings and months of work to get to something as simple as this. But it, you know, again, this, if we use this statement right here, and I know it's really wordy, but if we use this statement with our community groups, they know what that statement is because they created it, right? So it's not just a bunch of words for them. Like, they actually, we struggled, right? We'd have all those meetings to cross that word out and make this word, and, you know. Anyway, so it's really driven by the community. I'll go to the, are we on slide 2? So the other piece that made us focus in on the Boldness Project and focus on a neighborhood, focus on the babies, is that there's some data that's telling us some things about this particular neighborhood. And I don't need to probably tell you guys what all that data says, but it's kind of negative stuff, right? So it's saying that the kids in this particular neighborhood are not doing well. And so one of our, keep pointing at Rob here, but one of our measurement tools is the EDI. And so the EDI is saying that, you know, it's measuring outcomes for kids across Canada, and it is saying kids in this particular neighborhood aren't doing so well when you look comparatively. We've been able to pull some preliminary information, for instance, about the Canada Learning Bond. And then again, you know, at a national level, and probably going to get the numbers wrong, but it seems to me that 25% is sort of the uptake across Canada, and then we're down in the 20 or less percent, right? So again, in this particular neighborhood, we're not having the kind of outcome or uptake that we really want. So we're trying to figure out why is that, and then we're trying to figure out what we can do about it. So that hence the 6-year strategy. So the number 2 and number 3 about how it is we're going to go about this project really, again, came from the community. And so I said earlier that for those of us who don't live, work, play, you know, kick around a lot in the North End, the only way that you're going to find out what's going on in the North End typically is through media. And so when you turn on the media doesn't always have very nice things to say about the North End. They don't often portray the positive things that are going on. And so the North End tends to get a bad rap. There was like some bad stuff happening just over here in Centennial neighborhood, and it was like the North End, and I'm like, that's not the North End. Like, even stuff that's not happening in the North End gets attributed to the North End. Anyway, so, you know, from the community's perspective, it's that we need to start from a strength-based perspective, and we need to focus on what's going right in the North End. We need to focus on all the good stuff that's going on in the North End, and you know, like the parents that are in the North End. And so we know that everything we want to do is started from that strength-based place. And so that's the second way that we know we want to get there. The third one I would say is, and again, this is another me deciding to take on this project, I decided I would do it because I knew that number 3 was my driving motivation, which is there's a way of working with families that I know, I mean, it's not only in the North End, but that's been my experience. And so there's a way of working with families that really works, that, you know, is transformational for the kids and the families. And it's not, I didn't learn, I have also 2 university degrees. I did not learn that in school. I only learned it from working with the women in the community, really, and working directly with families and teenagers and kids. And so I feel very privileged to have had that kind of experience where I got to learn that and work with some of my mentors who are sort of into this wanting to retire years. And they're panicking because how are we transmitting that kind of knowledge and that kind of, you know, and so part of, like, there's my generation and the baton has been passed to those of sort of my age. And I know that I need to pass soon to that baton. And so we're trying to figure out how you just keep transmitting this. And so the idea that we need to write it down, we need to document it. So not create it, but document it. And that we need to put some other things around it like data, you know, we're moving in this evidence-based world. And so there's a lot of us that have all the evidence we need. You know, when we work with our families, we see it, we know what works with our families, but we need to provide that evidence in some other ways that will prove to other people what works. So building this, or documenting this model and putting some evidence based around it, so some of the data and indicators, and I'm not on the research guide group, I'm not big on that, but I'm looking at one of the researchers here. They get into conversations about data sets and cohorts, and I just think, oh yeah, whatever, just prove what I'm saying. So then there's sort of, we get this a lot, like how is boldness different? There's lots of good projects going on, there's lots of good initiatives happening out there, lots of programs and services, lots of pilot projects, and I've been a part of those pilot projects. So how are we different? And the way I frame it up is I think we're using these tools of social innovation and these tools of collective impact. So again, you know, and I'm, you know, I've participated in tons of coalitions in the North End. You know, I was around at the beginning days of Clout. You know, I've led and formed, I don't know how many coalitions that have marched down to City Hall. And so that kind of social activism and leading coalitions in North End, I've been a part of that. But in my experience, we've only done it in the North End, and we've only done it amongst us as community-based organizations. We haven't really reached out to other sectors, and we haven't really sort of on a day-to-day basis worked with the other sectors, whether it's government or philanthropics or what have you. So I think this feels very different to me, the idea of working across sectors like this, like on an ongoing way. And then, so that's sort of the collective impact kind of stuff, and probably a lot of you have been in a Tamarack session or two, so you get those 5 elements of the collective impact. But what's even newer than that, I think, is this concept of social innovation and using the social lab process, the co-creation process, so on and so forth. So we got a quick video that we're going to play that sort of sums it up, and I think the video is about 4 minutes long, so it'll explain better what social innovation is than I will.
We live in systems, on a planet, in a country, in an environment both natural and man-made, in a region, city, town, neighborhood, family. We have created systems to help us, like government, justice, education, health, economy, transportation. Many have benefited from the systems we have created, but some have been left out, isolated and vulnerable. Poverty, homelessness, addictions, unemployment, discrimination. Our natural systems have been seriously damaged too. Endangered species, loss of biodiversity, ozone depletion. Our systems have created complex problems that require novel system solutions if we and our planet are to survive and thrive. Social innovation is the result of the intentional work of people trying to make positive change happen by addressing these complex problems at their roots. Social innovation is a process, product, or program that profoundly changes the way a given system operates, changing it in such a way that reduces the vulnerability of the people and the environment in that system. As a consequence of a positive social innovation, many elements within a system grow more resilient, improving their ability to deal with future challenges. In the past, Canada has met challenges with social innovations like the Registered Disability Savings Plan, enabling people living with a disability financial independence well into older age, and universal health care, ensuring free health care and coverage to all citizens. These innovations are so much part of Canadian culture that we barely recognize the incredible vision, thinking, and actions that made them real. But these innovations do not just happen. They can be as difficult to introduce as the challenges they are trying to solve. Fortunately, there are people and groups across the world who have committed themselves to developing and supporting social innovation. They are creating new partnerships with a growing array of public, private, and community sector individuals and organizations. To see true innovation, we need to work for change at all scales. We need change at the individual level, at the organizational or network scale, and even legal, political, cultural, or economic change. People are taking a closer look at the systems we live in, and they are working together to help society and our planet thrive.
So that was a nice little video that the SIG group put together, and they've again, we really hit it on the social media front, and so we've attracted a lot of different attention where people are going, hey, what are you doing? We want to learn from you, and we have some stuff that we can help. And so SIG is one of those groups that is helping us to design a video that would be very specific to boldness. That's kind of like that, to sort of explain in a real nutshell what boldness is all about. So people come out of the woodwork, when you're doing stuff and they want to help. So again, the way of working in the community, this is something that, again, we struggled with. I don't know how many meetings to try and visualize what are we talking about with this child-centered model. We could talk about it forever and ever and ever, but to try and write it down, or visualize it and write it down. So we use the Venn diagram here, this model, and we call it ways of knowing, being, doing, feeling, and knowing. So, and then we talk about being child-centered, and so having the child at center, and all the, again, the community that's all around that child. And for those, having worked in the community for a long time, often we'll see the child here, and we'll see all of these services on the inside, and all the caregivers actually on the outside. And that's when we see our families experiencing the most challenges. It's got to be the other way around. So we use this to guide every decision we make at the Boldness Project. We use this to guide every way that we're going to build a strategy or whatever. We make sure that it sits well with this model. Next. So in addition to documenting that model, we've asked the community about what kinds of ideas do they think we would work as far as making life better for kids. And so they gave us sort of a list of about 40 ideas. And those 40 ideas, again, are, if you could just do this thing, it would make it better for the kids. And so, but then we were using language like intervention and strategy and prototype and lab process, just different things like that. And I think the language was triggering people, and so the community came up with this language to say, what we're really talking about is proofs of possibility. And so then we went, POP, like I love acronyms. You gotta have a good acronym. And so we talk about our POPs. And so those are the ideas from the community that we're moving on. So as you can see there, they're just basically action items that we can work on. And the other, when we talk about prototyping, what we're saying is, okay, we want to build like a small little prototype, a small little pilot idea, and then we want to run some families through it and make sure that that works for that small group of families. And once we think we've got that right, so it's testing our hunches. And when we think we got that right, then we want to scale and run more and more families through. So we haven't quite got to how many more families we're talking about. We could talk about, if we start with 20, we could talk about 100 families, we could talk about 84,000 families, we could talk about 1.4 million. It was, you're thinking there about all the kids across Canada. Anyway, we're bold. So that's what a POP is. Next. Out of the list of 40, we thought we would start with 5 just to give us a place to start. And so these are the 5 that we worked on. And so we're involved in this co-creation process where we're pulling all these different groups together to help us think through how would we design something that would get at that. And so we've had a couple of sessions now, and so we've got some starting points with these 5 proofs of possibility. And then we've had some further co-creation sessions around the Canada Learning Bond, and so you're part of that today too, so that we're hoping to get some input from you and some ideas from you about how we can further the work of the Canada Learning Bond. So real quick, family-centered decision making, again, is putting families at the center of what works for them and them sort of making the plan, and the rest of us, it's our job to figure out how to resource that plan or how to make that plan happen for families. So I know it probably sounds very straightforward, but most of the world does not work that way. Families are usually told. Families are never in the room when the plans are made for them, and they're just kind of said, here, go, then they're told to implement. So supports for dads, again, as society, we've kind of carved out the role of dad, and so we've built this whole industry around single moms. And so when dad does come around, he often has to hide. Families have to hide being a family because they're not allowed to be a family, right? Whether it's housing or social assistance or what have you, lots of systems will penalize if you're an actual family unit. Hub of Strength, more or less, is sort of a concept of community training, community capacity building, mentorship. That can either be small like this or it can be very, very huge. So we're kind of excited about that one. And then transportation, you probably have if not, have heard about the idea of trying to get around in the North End. And again, there's a whole bunch of us that started a coalition trying to get something going in the North End, and that's just a hard nut to. The idea of getting around and what we can possibly do seems to be fairly straightforward, but there's all these barriers such as cost and so on and so forth. So today we're drilling down on Canada Learning Bond. Just wanted to FYI, we've recently we have some great partners around the table, including the McConnell Family Foundation, who is one of our main funders along with the province of Manitoba. And they're working on, and Valupt is here because she's working directly on it, they're working on some national stuff about how it is we might advance the Canada Learning Bond, and with a particular focus around an Indigenous lens. And so we're still in the early days of completely sorting out what that looks, but assembling a whole bunch of partners nationally to further this work. And so the Boldness Project has most recently been asked if we would want to participate in that. And so we went back through all of our community guide groups and talked about the potential of it and talked about the idea of it. And again, basically everybody said, yeah, I mean, let's say for babies' education, wasn't really too many people that said, don't do that, that's bad. There was pretty much a resounding, yeah, let's do it, because the potential can be a real big payoff, so let's go. So Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I hope most of us in this room know that. If you don't, please Google it. But they're ending their 5-year mandate, and so they're having their final event in Ottawa in June. And so we're hoping that there'll be some, and we have Nicole here from the McConnell Family Foundation, so we're hoping to do something at that event that has impact and is relevant and will be the start of something really great. So just wanted to let you know that. And then here, so getting into the Canada Learning Bond and the work that we're doing at the Canada Learning Bond, we're just going to play a quick video here of one of our parents and her experience with the Canada Learning Bond, and then I'll talk to you a little bit more about specifically what we've been doing on the ground about understanding what families need to go through in order to access the Canada Learning Bond.
A person at the resource center that I go to actually told me about it, and they tried to get me to sign up the first time that I went for it, but I couldn't get my kids' SIN numbers at the time because their computer system went down. So I went back a second time when the Boldness Project told me about it, and I signed up and got everything going and got my kids' SIN numbers beforehand, so I was ready and prepared to get everything done and filled out. I think it would give them something to look forward to and give them the inspiration to actually do good in school and pay attention to school and teachers and work on getting their grades up and help them out and kind of motivate them to do something more. Well, I want to give my kids an equal opportunity to go on besides high school and do something that they want to do with their lives and have a career. Because that's the most important thing I tell my kids is that you have to go to school, you have to get an education to get somewhere in life. And this will help them out even more because being on assistance doesn't really give you much money to put away for your kids' further education. So my oldest kid understands because I told him that he's 7, he's going to be 7 in July. And I told him that I put money together for this bond, that he can have a better education after high school, and that he understands that he wants to get a job, he wants to be a police officer, and he knows he's going to need some college education and other things like that. And I told him that this is what I'm trying to do to help you out with it. And he understands, and he's like, that's good, Mom. He's like, I love you. So yeah, he understands. I just want them to be happy and live their lives the way they want to. Like, whatever they want to choose, I'm there with them 100%. It's a relief to know that I did this for them and know that I'm here to support them and do anything I can to help them out better with their lives, because that's what everybody wants, is for the kids to have a better life than what they had. So that's what I want for my kids too.
So again, our first person running through the prototype. So part of this co-creation process, and we kind of been at that since January and pulling different groups together to understand what is it that families have to go through in order to access the Canada Learning Bond. And we've come up with this, what we're calling a map. And we're calling this a systems map. And so we have it here on the wall as well. But basically the white lines with the dot are what we call the elements of the map. And so and again, we've just kind of, through all the dialogue, have made these sections up. And so the whole idea of awareness and just creating awareness around the Learning Bond, and and some of most of us didn't. I had no clue what a CLB was until this, And earlier we had a session with some of the banks this morning, and so even in inviting the banks into the room this morning, Greg Hansen was extending a lot of those invites, and he said most of the banks didn't even know about that. Again, banks are big, right? There's all these people within banks, and so most of the banks didn't even know what a CLB was. So this whole idea of awareness is one part of the map. And so what are all these pieces here are the supports that are already in place and the things that are already happening that support families through the Learning Bond. And then the dots are actually the barriers. And so we kind of just color coded what some of the barriers are. And this isn't an exhaustive list, but this is what we've been hearing so far. So lack of trust, social isolation, literacy, the mobility and stability, the historical issues, basic needs, and the motivation for the Learning Bond. So each of these are color-coded, and we've plotted them kind of within each of the elements to show like where families hit barriers all along the way. So creating awareness, then there's the idea of actually recruiting families and what would be the incentive for families to sign up, all the way to the actual sign-up process. And so we kind of mark it here as this is where you actually get the Learning Bond into your account or into the account, and then all of the work that goes on after you signed up, because there's still a whole bunch of work that has to happen post sign up. And then we listen to things that have happened in Wabash County, and we start dreaming about, oh my gosh, like what really could happen from there all the way through to when kids are ready to actually go to post-sec. So we've identified. So we've kind of put together the systems map. It's by no means complete. That's part of what you're here today, is to help us think through what are some more elements along this map, or what are some more of the supports or barriers, and just really trying to fully understand how to better help our families get through. So of course, families are different, and so some families have an easier time of this, and other families have a harder time of this. So trying to sort out how we can just reach the most families possible. So just real quick, just to rattle this off, in some of the sessions we've had so far, there's three main areas of activity, I think, that we've identified so far. So the whole idea of ID, from the birth certificate to the social insurance number to, picture ID, you name it. There's a whole thing around that needs to get solved for families. That just seems to be a huge barrier for families. Another piece, which is part of what our morning session was about, was the whole accessibility of banking. And that's a big bunch of stuff that needs to get talked about too. And so one little thing is, like, in the catchment area of Point Douglas, we have a credit union, 2 credit unions, I believe, and 1 Scotiabank. That's it. So as far as the bricks and mortar go, right? So, and then, we know that there are these possibilities around electronic access, but again, we're kind of dealing in a neighborhood that doesn't have internet, doesn't have computers, the whole literacy around online literacy, there's a whole bunch of barriers there as well. So what can we do about that? There's lots of, I think, once we get the folks in the room, I know that we can come up with a lot of creative ideas about how to overcome those barriers. And then the third one is the supported enrollment. And so that's really where the community-based organizations, I think, have, in my experience, the best relationship and most trusting relationship with families. And so that's often where our families will trust our community-based organizations. And so if our community-based organizations are saying, this is a good thing and we're going to walk with you through this, they're more likely to actually sign up for the Learning Bond. So right now we have, we actually had more, and I think May has sort of said it too, we had the community-based organizations, we had too many of them volunteer to help us with this, and so we had to kind of pull it back a little bit. But we're gonna, and so each of them are, so we have 4 community-based that are gonna start with, help us with this little prototype, and we're gonna run 20 families through and see if we can get them through this gauntlet in the best way possible, which will help us to identify either more supports and more barriers. It will also help us, because there's this whole training element to it as well. So there's going to be some built community capacity around that will hopefully live on. And we're hoping to also, and this is kind of why most of you guys are in the room, is to identify what the systemic barriers are and how it is that we may approach the systems change that's needed. And part of the litmus test that we use at the Boldness Project and why the Boldness Project is working on something, we know that we as the Boldness staff can marshal a whole bunch of support and help and apply all of that energy and resource and support to a problem. But the minute we stop it, it all stops. That is not the kind of work we want to engage in. We want to be able to, so once we stop it, that the thing lives on, right? That it's embedded, and I think Clint said it earlier, right? Embedded within already systems. And in a way that isn't necessarily seen as a whole bunch more work for people, but hopefully is a way that is part of just the natural part of a system, or if it is a bunch more work, that we at least see the huge payoff, and so it's worth the effort that we're going to put into it. So that's kind of this idea of prototyping and this idea of running, designing an intervention or a POP around the Canada Learning Bond. So, and again, I just wanted to back up and say, out of the 40 ideas that families gave us, they didn't necessarily say, let's do Canada Learning Bond. They said education for our kids is important. And so we saw a lot of work happening around the Learning Bond, and so we just decided to jump on that wagon. And so all of the people that we've convened so far, I have to say, some of them, and so some of these ones here, some of these folks know of each other, and one or two of them have kind of worked together, but for the most part, most of them don't really know that the other is doing this work, and most of them haven't really worked together. So they're all doing individually great work. So it's more a matter of the orchestrating and the coordinating and the, how do we lever each other, and if we all need to do it individually, then we need more of that, right? I mean, so this is the idea of generating the ideas and generating the solutions all together. So again, part of why you're here. Last, yes. These are just some of the initial ideas that have come to us so far, like how do we create efficiencies in the system so that families aren't having to constantly be interacting with the system so many times to get this done. And so trying to streamline processes. The cost, and we kind of just did a real quick numbers look at the physical cost to a family to actually get to the point of enrolling in the Canada Learning Bond. It can be like $330 by the time they get childcare, to get someplace because they have to be in person to sign the thing, to getting the ID, to the transportation, you name it. So we've a real cost to families can be about $300. To get the initial $500 investment, and then, sometimes that long-term thinking of the $2,000 is just not in people's immediate future or in their radar, right? So, and I think what you heard again, what I'm just so impressed with the Wabash County is this a community creating a college-bound identity, and I know some of us were tearing up in the room earlier, and so I think that. And I just go to where, my heritage and being a First Nations woman, most of our kids don't see themselves represented in the education system. And so the idea that they would go to school, and part of my Centennial Project days, walking into a whole school that had 95% Indigenous kids and nothing, not a teacher, not a custodian, not the lunch lady, not a poster on the wall, nothing in curriculum. Indigenous identity showed up nowhere. And so what we said was, we're telling kids that education is important, but you are not if you're Indigenous, right? So that's just, the Boldness Project isn't just about Indigenous kids, but we are in a neighborhood that has a large Indigenous population, and so a lot of the folks that we're dealing with are of Indigenous descent. So just this idea of our kids are not even thinking, they could see their career in the gang more than they could see their career in school. And so we got to change that. And so this idea of a college-bound identity to me is the biggest payoff, more so than a $2,000 account, right? And then the whole financial institution piece. And so how do we make that a bit more accessible for families? So those are some of our starting places of how can we ask people to be involved with us, and how can we start to solve for some of these issues. So we're going to get into the next part this afternoon, but part of what we really want to know from you is, do you see other supports available to us? And I know some of you have done this work. And then, do you see other barriers? And then, what can we do about it together? So that's kind of what we want to get from you too, is how can we potentially solve some of these ideas. So again, I know you're super busy. Everyone is. There's a million things you could be doing other than being here. And so we really appreciate when you take the time to come and sit together and to hear what we're doing, but more importantly, to apply your really smart brains to help us figure out what we need to do moving forward. So, miigwech.